Welcome to the King Talk podcast, where we're all about truth, community, and discussing the things you care about because we care about you. Of course, I'm your host, Adam Coleman. And today, man, we got the second installment of this segment we call Table Talks, where we have a panel discussion about the content our guests have brought to light in recent weeks. In case you missed the last one, our first Table Talk session, I would definitely encourage you to go check that out, man. It was fire, man. Definitely a dope discussion. This week, we're going to be discussing that Dr. Eric Mason interview. And actually, as a matter of fact, if you haven't heard that joint, man, you might want to go ahead and check that out, get caught up to speed. So that's what we're talking about here. But, back at the table with us today, we have the founder and president of King Movement, Chris Broussard. How's it going there, brother?
I'm great, my brother. How you doing, man?
Doing great, man. Doing great. Ready to chop it up about this Dr. Mason interview. But also, hey, on the line, we got my man Cliff, Big Money Means, at the table with us again. So how's it going there with you there, brother?
Hey, I'm good, man. Just another day, another dollar, like they say, man.
I feel you. Chris, a minute ago, man, I'm going to come at you with this, man. You talked about historical contributions of Africans, and Dr. Mason hit on the same point, man. Maybe it's just a thing with y'all being stepbrothers and all that. Y'all kind of got that vibe going, but he talked a lot about the contributions of Africans to church history, but he also noted that those contributions have, in a lot of ways, been undervalued, man. Would you agree with that? I mean, what's your perspective on that?
Oh my God! I mean,
that's a
your brief perspective. Let me.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying that the black contribution to the church, to Christianity, has been hidden, buried, whatever you want to call it. I'll give you an example. I thought about going to seminary. I actually had a few points in my life. And one time I was actually enrolled in this seminary, and I sat in on a class. And this was maybe 15 years ago. I sat in on a class, and the class was called Church History. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it was the first day, so they handed out the syllabus, and I looked through the syllabus, and it wasn't church history. It was European church history. Mm. They taught you nothing about the Ethiopian church, which was Ethiopia's one of the two oldest Christian nations in the world. They taught you nothing about the Egyptian Coptic church. They taught you nothing about Christianity in Nubia. Nubia was a Christian nation from the 600s AD to the 1500s AD. They taught you nothing about the Indian Orthodox Church, which was founded by the Apostle Thomas. Okay, all they taught you about was European history. They even went to the Catholic Church, which a lot of Protestants now would say is heretical or not correct. But that they taught you that history, and then they taught the Reformation, and so right. They taught it not as European church history. They taught it as church history. As if that was the only history, as if that was universal. And so that is one example. And this was a seminary that actually, was fairly progressive, I guess, compared to a lot of other seminaries I had looked at. So that's one example. But when you look in the Bible, I mean, whether it's Acts chapter 8, where the Ethiopian eunuch gives his life to Christ and accepts Jesus and is baptized, that was 600 years before Islam even existed. I'll give you in Acts chapter 11, when the Hebrews were questioning whether or not they should even preach the gospel to the Greeks and to the Gentiles, African men, the Bible says men from Cyprus and Cyrene, those were two territories in northern Africa. They went to the Greeks, and the Bible says they preached Jesus to them. So Africans brought the gospel to the Europeans long before Europeans brought it to Africa in the 15th and 16th centuries. And Acts chapter 13, Simon called Niger, right? Lucius of Cyrene, two of the three men that laid hands on the Apostle Paul and Barnabas and sent him out to the Gentiles to give them the gospel were black. If that type of history was known in Black America, number one, then the Nation of Islam would not be able to contend that Islam's the religion of the black man. When the religion of Islam didn't even exist till 600 years after blacks were already worshiping Jesus Christ. You know, if white America understood this history, then you wouldn't have, I'm not sure if you would, but it'd be harder to have the racism that exists in the so-called white church that you have had historically and today. I mean, during slavery, they were questioning whether or not black people even had souls.
Man.
You know, and if you understood the contributions that black people had made to Christianity, the religion that you claim to follow, if you understood that St. Augustine, who formulated more than any other individual the theology that Christian churches tend to follow today, was African. If you understood that Tertullian was African, and Athanasius, Origen, some of the most powerful theologians in the century or two after Christ, if you understood that they were African, then you would have never questioned whether or not we had souls. And you wouldn't be on a high horse, for those whites who are, to think that they're superior and that they did us a favor in enslaving us because we encountered Christianity. You wouldn't dare have that mentality if you understood that 1,600 years before the Atlantic slave trade, Africans had Christianity. So yeah, darn right, it's been hidden, and those are some of the negative repercussions of this history being hidden.
Absolutely. Hey, Cliff, you want to get in on that, man?
Yeah, I mean, that was powerful. I mean, the angle I would take is piggybacking on the effects that it's had. I think what it's also done is not just the Nation of Islam, but the woke community that we talked about earlier. I think the woke community has definitely underappreciates the contributions that Christianity has had. Not only the contributions that Africans have made to history, to Christianity, but I also think they underappreciate the contributions that Christianity has made to the advancement of human rights overall, especially the rights of black men, black and brown people, I should say, not just black men, but black and brown people in the West. You know, not especially here in America, when you think about men like Absalom Jones and Richard Allen, you know, people that the Richard Allen, who started the African American Methodist Episcopal Church, he's not spoken about. He's not talked about. This is a man who, up until his death, you know, took in slaves from the Underground Railroad. Frederick Douglass, who was not portrayed by most people to be Christian. He's just portrayed as a historical figure who was an abolitionist, but he was a devout Christian. Yes. You know, and Frederick Douglass himself talked about the very thing we're talking about. He talked about how troubled he was by the divide, the Christianity that he saw that was a slave-holding Christianity, and he compared that with the Christianity that he saw in the Bible and the Christianity he observed from Jesus, and he was able to separate the Christianity of this land is not the Christianity of the Bible. And so he
actually said that not to interrupt Cliff, but he actually said the divide between Christianity as it's practiced in America and the Christianity of Jesus Christ is so large that to love one is of necessity,
to despise the
hate
other.
The other.
Right. And that's, you know, that we've sanitized all these historical figures like Frederick Douglass, MLK. We nitpick the little cute quotes that we can replay every anniversary. But not only, and maybe this is veering off a little bit, but I think it's important not only to point out the contributions that have been made by African Americans in the advancement of human rights, but also those, because I'm not just proud of my Black heritage, I'm proud of my Christian heritage as well. And my Christian heritage, just like, look, I'm not proud of what's going on in Chirac right now. what's happening in Chicago, but I'm proud to be a black man. And so I'm proud to be a Christian. I'm proud of my Christian history. I'm not proud of everything that Christians have done. I'm not proud of the European colonization that many people associate Christianity with, but I am proud of the contributions, the historical contributions that Christians have made to the advancement of black and brown people. People that we underappreciate, don't talk about, people like William Lloyd Garrison, Thomas Fowell Buxton, Elizabeth Fry, who was big on prison reform, opposed capital punishment. I mean, there was a movement against that before Bryan Stevenson wrote Just Mercy. Yeah. It's been going on, and it's not just been black and brown people. So I think between underappreciating the contributions of Africans to Christianity and also underplaying the contributions that Christians of all colors have made toward the advancement and the dignity of black and brown people has also undermined the reputation of Christianity among the woke community. So the woke community only associates Christianity with colonization, oppression, suppressing human rights, when actually it's been one of the strongest forces, if not the strongest force, in the advancement of human dignity and human rights in modern times. So,
I think that's fascinating. Let me play quickly off what Cliff said quickly, because he was talking about African American contributions to Christianity, and it's important for blacks and whites to understand that as well. Again, with the conscious community, if they had 3 patron saints, they would probably be Marcus Garvey, Nat Turner, and Malcolm X. And 2 of those, Marcus Garvey and Nat Turner, were Christians. And they want to try to hide that, the black conscious folk. But these guys you worship, and the strength, according to them, not according to Chris Broussard, Cliff Means, and Adam Coleman in 2017, according to Marcus Garvey, according to Nat Turner, the strength that they had came from their faith in Jesus Christ. So they need to understand that. And then finally, what Cliff said, look, it's not not just the contributions that African people have made to Christianity, but I mentioned earlier the Indian Orthodox Church. Christianity was in India, when the Apostle Thomas brought it there. So the Christianity,
not just black and white,
the fact that Christianity is viewed by some as a white man's religion is an affront to God. That does not make him happy. And then we're not promoting it as a black man's religion. We're not promoting it as an Asian man's religion or Hispanic man's religion. It is no man's religion. It is God, the Almighty God, who is beyond these racial labels, coming down to earth in human flesh and redeeming mankind. It ain't no man's religion. And if it is ever associated with one man, one race, when the Bible talks about tribes of every tongue, people of every tribe coming together and worshiping.
Revelation 5:7.
When it is ever associated with just one race, that is an affront to God, and it is offensive. And so we're not trying to make it a black religion. We're just trying to make it a religion that all people feel equal in, because that is what it is at its essence.
Well, just tell the history.
Just tell the history.
Well, I mean, that's the point I was going to get to. I mean, honestly, I think that, when you think about like what Chris brought up with, Christianity being in India, we could even talk about ancient China. Obviously, we spoke about, for at least 1,500 years in Africa before the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, really, the only way that you can view Christianity as being the white man's religion is if you take on a Eurocentric lens of what history looks like. In other words, you have to basically allow yourself to be infected by white supremacy in terms of how you view history in order to even conclude that Christianity is the white man's religion, because there's way too much historical evidence, to go against that. And I think that's one thing I agree with you, man, with the conscious community. Like, why rob yourself of 2,000 years of African church history? Like, why step on your ancestors in that way just for the sake of, what some Europeans did in more so modern history? I mean, to me, it's why we lost so much history as it is.
Right.
We don't need to
Right.
be, throwing more of it away. And I think, honestly, man, real talk, I had the pleasure of going to the Frequency Conference this past weekend and
That
just
was the
seeing how
conference Eric
brothers.
Mason had, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, Eric Mason. He headed up the conference. I got a chance to see him speak. Got a chance to see Dr. Carl Ellis. A bunch of just powerful brothers, man. Black men standing up and telling it like it is from a biblical perspective. From an intellectual perspective. And I honestly think if you could take that conference and transplant it to every black church in America, I'm trying to tell you right now, you'd have men flooding the church, by next Sunday, because I think it really captured what men are looking for. Men want to be engaged intellectually. They want to be given a practical plan. I mean, shoot, they had one breakout session that just talked about money management. And I don't mean like what Cliff was talking about, like, passing the tithe around, not that kind of thing, but, like starting a business.
That blessing.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Starting a business, savings, things like that,
Right.
understanding how credit works. You know what I mean? And I think that, that was one of the breakout sessions. So capturing those kind of things, I think that, unfortunately, we just don't see that, that aspect of what the church is broadcasted enough. And I mean, there was keeping it real too. I mean, they talked about real issues. They talked about white supremacy. They talked about police brutality at the conference. They talked about even within the church, getting pushback from white evangelicals. As a matter of fact, Dr. Mason in the interview, he talked about, we talked about one of his Facebook posts recently where, it went viral, where, he was reacting to some of the flack that he's caught and African American Christians have caught from white evangelicals. I kind of want to get you guys' thoughts on that in terms of that aspect of the interview, where you're dealing with that tension between African Americans and, unfortunately, some aspects of the white evangelical church.
Well, what was the Facebook post? What did he say?
Well, yeah, I can read a portion of it. I think it'll help us to frame the discussion a little bit. So this is the Facebook post or a portion of Dr. Mason's Facebook post that I think attracted a lot of attention. If an African American who is considered a conservative evangelical is perceived as a safe Negro, begins to speak out on racial justice and inequality, they are dubbed a problem or race baiting or changing or a question about valuing the gospel or all people, then let it be done. I will not stop. I will not be silent. End quote. So I'm just throwing that out there. I want to kind of get you guys' perspective on that.
Go ahead, Cliff.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he's just coming out. You know what I mean? Like, I think he's been speaking to these issues for a while, but I think eventually what happens is, especially if you're a black Christian in conservative, reformed, as they may say, or any conservative Christian circle, you have to sanitize your blackness. You have to be safe. And otherwise, and I don't think it's conscious. I think there's a whole group and a whole crop of African American Christians who found themselves in these circles and didn't consciously set their blackness aside. I don't even think they ever denied being black. I mean, you can be, I mean, they love the cultural, and when I say they, I mean, the church as a whole, not to say, white people are a monolith, but, it's okay and it's culturally acceptable to, quote unquote, act black. So I'm not saying you have to cast aside your urbanness. You can be urban. You can talk the talk. You can sing the songs. I heard one man. I heard one man say they love when you sing the songs. They love your voice when you're singing, but they don't want to actually hear your voice. Like they don't want to hear you actually speak, but they want the gift of your culture. And so what I think Dr. Mason is alluding to is this idea that you're okay with me being black as long as I don't bring up these issues that actually are uncomfortable and affect us. As long as I don't bring up issues of justice. And I've had it said to me. I had one guy say to me when I mentioned, just advocating for African Americans. He said, "Man, you're really into that stuff now. What happened to you?" And you know
you contracted something.
Yeah. Like I switched up. You know what I mean? Like, and there's this idea that black rights are not human rights. Like that's just something separate. You know, like, why are you getting off on? If I was to say I'm in I'm dealing with people who are caught up in the child sex trafficking trade, there would be no pushback. You understand?
Sure.
If I was to say I'm going over to Africa, you know, to help people over there who find themselves experiencing ethnic cleansing, or they may be in a civil war. Okay, oh, that's so commendable. I get the claps. Or refugees. Oh, commendable. As long as it's not happening here on our premises. Because
Sure.
as far as a lot of people are concerned here, there's still this idea embedded deep in people's hearts that America is a Christian nation. And if somebody here is catching hell, it's not because of the system. It's because of their own doing. Because in a lot of people's minds, America is faultless. And people here are not, we don't admit that people here are oppressed. We can admit that people overseas are oppressed. So we'll do mission trips. But we can't admit that people here at home are oppressed. And so you get a lot of pushback when you begin to give voice to that, because it hits close to home. And I think that's what what Dr. Mason was giving voice to. And it's the same thing that Dr. King talked about in his letter to Birmingham. You know, he talked about, look, it's not the KKK that I'm worried about that's giving us the most problems. It's the white moderate. It's the white moderate that says to me and is saying to us, hey, you know, we get why you're upset. We agree with your goal, but the way you're doing it, we can't support you in that. And that kind of voice and that kind of pushback is what we've been getting, from unfortunately white people in the church for a long time. And you know, we don't. It's telling people how to fight for their dignity. You know, it's paternalistic, telling people how they should go about getting their own rights. And you can only do that when you're in a position of privilege.
Well, I mean, quite frankly, I think that, you know, many Americans, you know, white and black, quite frankly, are delusional about American history. I mean, to be honest with you,
they don't know.
And it was, you know, they don't know. And I think what's interesting is that, you know, from a biblical standpoint, particularly in the Reformed Church, I mean, you know, one of the more crucial doctrines is that all of us are in sin. All of us have fallen short of the glory of God. You know, we've all messed up in one way or the other, but for whatever reason, you know, folks want to give America a pass or an exemption as if that doesn't apply, you know, to America's history. And then when I think about the War of 1812, where black people were enlisting with the British Army to fight against America because they were being promised their freedom by the British, you know, or when I think about, you know, black people fighting for America in the Revolutionary War, expressing that they had hopes that America would become something better than what it was, and ultimately allow freedom for the black man. You know, when I think about those things, and then obviously moving forward into, you know, the antebellum South, obviously moving forward into the Jim Crow era, there's a reality to just, you know, just this culture being infected, you know, that folks just flat out don't want to acknowledge. I think about this, a quote from Booker T. Washington, where he says that in order to keep another man down in the ditch, you know, you can't do so without remaining in the ditch with them, you know. And I think that when we think about, you know, black people being oppressed in this country, I think it cost, you know, white America something to oppress black people the way that they did. Like you can't possibly not lose your humanity, you know, when you know, leave church, you know, from hearing a sermon and then go hang somebody during a picnic. You can't do something like that without losing a piece of what it means to be human. And I think that we have to be real. No, I'm saying I just think that we have to be real.
Where it costs them is spiritually and eternally. Honestly. Right. Sure. I mean, that's where it costs you. And the fact of the matter is that what Pastor or Dr. Mason was talking about, and Cliff, you as well, when African Americans in those evangelical circles, when they begin to address issues of justice, racism, things like that, they get pushback. And the whites that they're around in those church communities or settings want them to just focus on the personal gospel of salvation. Every
Right.
individual needing to be saved. Okay.
Right.
Well, the reason they do that is because whites in America have had the luxury of just focusing on the gospel of personal salvation. Because
Right.
the world, the American system, has been beneficial to them. They don't
Right.
get it. They haven't had
Right.
issues with the world historically in America. Now, the Bible
Right.
talks about the world being against you and you will have tribulation in the world and all that. White American Christians have not had to deal with it. They haven't
Right.
had that relationship with the quote unquote world. So to
Right.
them, why just focus on the gospel of personal salvation? But
Right.
it's interesting when they began, and especially nowadays, a lot of white Christians are, the American society is turning against Christianity in a lot of ways and
Sure.
against Christian values. And now they want to get more political and they want to speak,
Right.
more about issues like that and stuff. So the
Right.
white American Christians have never had to think of their Christianity in a revolutionary way.
Right. Yep.
They
Yep.
because the
They've been
world,
privileged.
American
Yeah.
society, that's a part of white privilege. It has benefited them. It's been friendly
Right.
to them. Black American Christians, our Christianity has always had to be revolutionary. Our Christianity couldn't just be about your soul getting saved. Like Martin Luther King said, I'm going to mess up his quote, but our Christianity had to be about also how could you get some shoes here on earth? Our
Right.
Christianity had to be about how can I, get to go and eat at this restaurant? How can I get into
Right.
this school? How can I stay in this hotel? How can I use this restroom? Our Christianity
Right.
had to encompass all of that. How can I get some food on my table? So our Christianity has had to be revolutionary, and revolutionary Christianity is the most biblical form of Christianity because Jesus was a straight up revolutionary. Unquestionably.
Right.
And
Right.
so to be honest, going forward, if America continues to become more and more antagonistic toward Christianity, white Christians are actually going to have to look to black Christians for knowledge and understanding of how to live in a society that is antagonistic towards you because of your faith. This society has always, for the most part, been antagonistic toward us. And we have learned how to deal with it. We have even learned in many cases to thrive and overcome it. And so they're going to have to come to learn from us how you can overcome in an antagonistic society.
That's deep. That's deep. And
Yeah.
what's powerful is, I honestly, I think, and I'm going to go ahead and plug them right quick, like going back to the frequency conference, I think every Christian, especially men, owes it to themselves to go ahead and get the at least the main session. You can order the audio from their website. And the reason why I say that is everything that you just said, Chris, they break down a thoroughly biblical and even sociology. My man, Dr. Carl Ellis, man. I mean, when I say that his presentation was deep, bruh, I mean, he goes from theology to sociology and really ties it together and shows how, the experiences that you talked about, of us, having to take on this revolutionary flavor to Christianity, how it's thoroughly biblical and theologically valid. And I can't do it justice. But the point I'm trying to make here is, unfortunately, we haven't valued our own, I guess you could say, theological experience. I think we've allowed others to dictate the validity of what it is that we have to say. And I think that's a problem. That's a problem. Africans have always had something to say, in terms of church history. And I don't think it's any different now. Frederick Douglass was saying stuff that was just as biblically profound as, any, preacher that you might want to name. But I think what we have to do is reclaim that history from this like semi-secular view that we have. It. We have to reclaim Frederick Douglass. We have to reclaim Marcus Garvey because they were saying important things from a biblical perspective. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we have to recover our prophetic voice. basically.
There you go.
You know, prophetic. You know, we know about prophecy unfortunately in the black churches. You know, telling folks they're gonna get this, that, and the third. But
Well, not just the black church.
but speaking specifically too. But obviously, you know, it's Benny Hinn and all these other folks. But you know, we need to recover the prophetic voice where we go ahead of these issues. Unfortunately, we've become very reactionary and become a reflection of the larger society instead of actually going ahead of the culture and saying, hey, this is the way. You know, the same way the church really took the lead position on abolition. The church took the lead position on civil rights in the 60s. But now today, the church is sort of behind and playing catch up and reacting to the Colin Kaepernicks of the world, the Black Lives Matters of the world. And although they're speaking up and we obviously support what they're doing. Jesus being the original revolutionary, there's no reason why we should be playing catch up in those areas. We should have been the first ones to kneel, so to speak. You know, we should have been the first ones to say, this is not the way, this is the way. And so I would like to see, you know, Chris was saying if Europeans are going to have to come to us, they're going to be reacting, still in the position of reacting. You know what I'm saying? Moving slow on slavery, you know, which Dr. Mason talked about, you know, the guy who's a paleo Confederate and they still sitting around debating about the justness of slavery. I'm like, really? Like, we still having this conversation at this point? You know what I mean? Like, it's so,
What was he saying?
Well, I'm not gonna lie, man. Like, you know, so Dr. Mason tells his story of a paleo conservative, and during the interview, I just kind of nodded as if I knew what he was talking about. Confederate. I'm sorry, paleo Confederate. I just kind of act like I knew what he was talking. I didn't know what a paleo Confederate was. I had to go back and look it up. You know, to be honest with you. But you know, apparently, a paleo Confederate is somebody who doesn't believe that slavery was just, but that the South was justified in defending itself against the North, who wanted to impose federal power on the states and undermine the Constitution and things like that. You know, apparently he was referring to a particular gentleman named Douglas Wilson, who is a Reformed theologian who is a self-avowed and outward paleo Confederate. You know, he argues that because of the way slavery ended, that the federal government had, you know, basically had an overreach in terms of applying its laws and things of that nature, and that basically that slavery would have died out because of, you know, love and that, so on and so forth. And he actually
see what I mean? See what I mean?
Right.
He says Come on,
he
brother.
actually said he said
it had been what 250 years before, and these Christians hadn't figured out love.
They was going all of a sudden. They was you wanted us to wait another 200 years. I mean,
let me address this dude.
Okay.
First of all, he was saying. Think about what he was saying. He was saying it was wrong for the North to fight to end slavery.
Right. Through violence.
But
that's what he's saying.
But he would fight for the Confederate Army.
Yes.
So he was saying it was wrong to fight to end slavery, but it was right or justified to fight to maintain slavery.
Yep.
That's number one, where it's ridiculous. Number two,
ridiculous.
Okay, does he think it was wrong for America, what became America, to fight the Revolutionary War? Does he think that? America was being taxed without representation, right? Taxation without representation. That's nowhere near as bad as being enslaved. Okay, so does he think it was right for, you know, white Americans to fight to end their relationship with Britain as a colony, you know, but he thinks it was wrong to fight against slavery? I would have more respect for him if he's just a straight up pacifist and was just like, I don't think it's right to fight at all.
Right.
It's not right to
Right.
fight to end slavery. It's not right to fight to maintain slavery. America wasn't right to fight in the Revolutionary War to get free of Britain. If that was his mentality, I would at least respect you. I would disagree because I believe there is a case for just war.
Right.
But
Right.
I would at least respect you because you are consistent. But you're
Right.
not
be
consistent in
consistent,
this
right.
in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. And you're supposed to be a biblical scholar. And
Yeah,
that's
right.
look, white people are not the gatekeepers of Christianity. Let me say
Right.
that to a
They
lot
think
of
they
these
like New
Reform
Yorkers
brothers.
in hip hop, like the
Facts, right.
gatekeepers of hip hop. How
Yeah.
New Yorkers always want to tell you got to drop bars. No,
Well,
y'all
yeah,
ain't
I
the
will-
gatekeepers.
I-
wait a
hold
minute,
on,
wait,
I
wait,
will-
wait,
y'all
wait,
ain't the
wait, wait, wait.
I
gatekeepers.
will say this. I will say this. At least New York created hip hop. Right?
Right,
At least
okay.
New York has that
Bring
claim.
us back.
Right.
No man, that's the great thing about Christianity. No man, no race
No
has
man
that
got
claim,
claim on it.
that I
Yep.
created Christianity.
Facts.
God himself
Facts.
created that. So
Amen.
black people in particular need to get over this feeling, this sense that whites are the gatekeepers of Christianity. And we can only move in a doctrine or something if they say it's okay.
Right.
You know, they may be, it's just the Bible is there for all of us to read. The Holy Spirit is present in each one of us believers. The Bible itself says there's one mediator between God and man, and that's Jesus Christ. So we don't have to go to them or someone else to check and see, is this okay?
You have
Can
no
we
need
talk
that
about
any man
justice?
teach you.
Can we talk?
Right.
No, we're going,
Right.
the Bible is the gatekeeper of Christianity.
Right.
And that, so this dude, I mean, come on, I'm not, this is ridiculous.
Well, let me
Let
say
me
this.
jump
I mean,
on this a little bit. Okay, go ahead, Adam.
No, go ahead, Cliff. Go ahead, man.
No. Go ahead, bro.
Well, I just want to say real quick. I can make mine brief. I think, but
No, you're not brief.
no, generally not.
We know better. Yeah,
As
you
far,
ain't brief. Go
as
ahead.
far as where y'all got me on that. I mean, as far as what Doug Wilson is saying, right? I mean, if Doug Wilson, the Paleo Confederate, I think is how you say it, if he's talking about just pure legality, then he might be correct in terms of, from the standpoint that the southern states had a right to uphold whatever laws. I mean, there was more of a sense of autonomy among the states at that time. If we're just talking about pure legality,
But is he consistent? That's
Well,
my
wait,
question.
let him finish.
Britain had a right too.
Wait, I'm
we
gonna
were
get there. I'm
colonies.
gonna get there. I'm just saying that in terms of this country, I think he's probably at least close to correct about the legality of the matter. However, my point is, I think he's nearsighted, in terms of his complete worldview. In terms of, I think legality is just a nearsighted way to look at the Civil War, and what I mean by that is, in addition to the legal side, you have to look at the moral law. Which is, I think, is really what we're trying to get to here. Like, just like there are natural laws of gravity, for example, I can say that gravity doesn't exist, but if I jump out a window, I'm going to crash. I mean, obviously, in the same way that there's a moral law, and when you don't abide by the way in which God has structured the moral law, there's going to be consequences. In this country, obviously, America just totally, in regards to black people, just totally disregarded God's moral law, and there's consequences to that. God made mankind in such a way, that there's a reality to morality. And when you try to build something on that foundation, in a flawed sort of a way, you're bound to have problems, And so I think that there are some moral causes that, even though the legality of the Civil War might not have been, what was on the books, so to speak, the way things are supposed to happen, I think there are some moral causes, like the fight against the Nazis or the Civil War, that are worthy and are just, as to go to your term, Chris, is a just war, irregardless of what the legal side says. I mean, the USA was drug into the Civil War by its inability to uphold the moral law, that it espoused in some of his founding documents. It was hypocrisy to the core, and that's why I think it's a just war. The moral.
Well, you said it. I mean, they were dragged into the war, so he makes it seem like folks just, like 2 days passed and we went to war. Like this was an issue that they were contending on for years. Like England had long abolished slavery. I think it was maybe 30
1830s,
years,
yeah.
30 years prior that they had abolished slavery. This was an ongoing debate. And so it wasn't like we weren't patient, you know. I mean, and the you know what I mean? Like, and the thing that blows my mind. I mean, there's just so many things to address here, and I'll try to just address a couple because you can't address all of it. First of all, you know, the only slavery I know of biblically that resembles anything that we had here in the United States is what happened, what the Bible portrays the Jews going through in Exodus, what they went through in Egypt, the oppression that they experienced. That's the only thing I know that resembles the slavery that took place here in the United States. And God destroyed Egypt for that. And God was patient. You know, gave Pharaoh a lot of chances to go ahead and let the people go. But eventually, judgment had to come. And so, you know, it was not a matter of Christians just rising up and abolitionists just rising up and saying, let's kill some folks today or let's fight today. It had gotten to the point where the South seceded and said, no, we're not doing this. Y'all don't want to let the slave states expand. We are seceding from the Union. And so they really forced the war. The South did, because they basically said, look, we're walking away from the table. So he acts like we had a choice. You know, he acts like, that you know, 200, and as Chris said, 230 years had gone by where there was no change. And what were we supposed to just keep loving for another 5 years, another 10 years, another 100 years? And all of a sudden it was going to flip. It's naive. Another thing, the tone deaf nature of what he's talking about. One, he's sitting up in a, you know, waxing eloquently about slavery and talking about it in the way that he does. He actually called it a normal sin. That's what he said. He said that slavery was a normal sin. It was something that was tolerable and had historical precedent. And it was something that we should have just it was something we could have tolerated. We didn't have to go to war over it. He actually sees the federal government overreaching as a greater evil than slavery. And what I think it speaks to is the modern day chasm between blacks and whites in this country, because you have so many white people who will prioritize in their mind the idea of the federal government having too much power. To them, that's like the chief evil. You know, that's like that's the worst thing. As if, first of all, even the states having power is a form of government. Are angels? Right, right. That's a form of. Are there angels at the state level of government too? I mean, I understand you want some autonomy or a little more autonomy, but let's not act like the same human beings who lust for power ain't running the state government as the same human beings lusting for power running the federal government. But nevertheless, you're talking about a model of government and you're comparing that to slavery. And that's why we have the issues we do today, because a lot of times there's a tone, there's a huge divide amongst a lot of black people and blacks and whites where especially Christians, a lot of white Christians see these issues like the government, limited government. They see that equal to black people being shot in the street, right, unarmed. They see those two things on the same level. They don't see them on the same level. They see black people being shot in the street as tolerable. As okay, it may be a problem, but it ain't nothing compared to this federal government that's trying to take our guns from us. Right. I mean, that's a way bigger issue.
Here's the thing. Yeah. This guy is an example of someone who only sees things through white eyes. Right. That's it. Right. If he's sitting there saying slavery was tolerable, he's clearly only seeing it through white eyes. And that is a form of white privilege. Yes, white people have the luxury of not having to look at things through black eyes. Black people have to look at things through white eyes because we have to adjust to this system in most cases to survive or to thrive or to get into school and get a job. And we have to look at things, obviously, because we're black, through black eyes. Right. And that's that's not a burden. It's a burden, but at the same time, as a Christian, you should be able to look at things. A healthy Christian does look at things through everyone's eyes. That's where Jesus said, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." That tells you have to be able to look at something, someone else through someone else's eyes.
Right.
Would you want to be in that situation?
Well, let me
And
say this.
Let me
this
ask a question. Let me
theologian
ask a question
has
to
failed
y'all.
to do that.
Let
Well,
me
yeah, I
ask
agree.
a question to y'all
Oh,
real quick. So he definitely would not say this about the Holocaust, right? He would not minimize the Holocaust that way. He would not say that it was something that was tolerable. So let me ask the question and put that out to you guys. Speak to that. And one, the answer is obvious, but I want to hear y'all elaborate on it. Why is it wrong? What's the problem with someone like Doug Wilson saying, "Hey, the Holocaust was different. That was
Has he
not
said that?
tolerable."
well, in my opinion,
Did he say
yes.
that?
Yes.
Oh, he did say
yes.
that. Okay.
Yes,
right, so
he did.
from my perspective, I mean, a couple things. Number one, and I've said this before publicly. I do believe that much of America, and I think Doug Wilson is representative of this, are morally and intellectually lazy. When it comes to things that sit right in their backyard. I mean, when you talk about the Holocaust, it doesn't take any self-reflection or change. It doesn't require anything of you to say that the Holocaust was wrong, because America fought against the Holocaust. We were on the right side of that. But when it comes to slavery, and when it comes to America and the injustice that have been going on and do go on continually here in America, it requires self-reflection and it requires change.
Right.
And
Right.
where I'm going with that, I think that if you look at the Civil War, I don't think that it's insignificant, and I don't think that it's coincidental that the Civil War was by far the bloodiest war America has ever fought. Right? Just
600,000
recently, the body count, when you total up all the other wars put together, the body count just recently, I think, surpassed just the number of people who died in the Civil War alone.
Yeah.
Maybe just 2 years ago, I think it surpassed it.
600,000. Yeah.
About 600,000. There you go. I don't think that's insignificant. I don't think it's coincidental. I think that I agree with Abraham Lincoln, even though he was on some stuff too. We can go there. But I agree with him and many others of his time who understood that slavery was a national sin. You can go back to the original documents. You can go back to primary sources, and you can see terms like that being used leading up to the Civil War and even during the Civil War, that they understood it to be a national sin. Now, if you're an individual and you are attempting to minimize or justify fighting on behalf of a national sin, then what you've told me is that there's an aspect of your heart that God is not Lord over. Jesus is not Lord over your concept of identity and who you believe yourself to be. Because if he was, there's no way that you could allow yourself to adopt a view as heinous as saying that you would fight on behalf of one of the most morally reprehensible systems that mankind has ever seen. It's not true. I mean, when we talking about a normal sin, sin is sin to me. I'm sorry, whether it's normal, abnormal, or what. I don't. If you think that castrating black men and breaking up families and selling folks down the river, to never see their children again, and cutting off people's limbs for trying to run away, or like Robert E. Lee did when people tried to run away, and people swear that he was against slavery, but he beat his slaves to send a message that that their freedom doesn't trump his right to own them and subjugate them. If you believe that it's okay for you theologically as a Christian to stand on the side of that, then you don't understand Christianity. And I don't care how eloquent you wax or whatever. I really don't care. You're telling me something about, I can't speak on your salvation. Look, but I can't consider you to be a disciple of Christ.
Jesus said, "You know them by their fruits."
There you go.
And you see what type of fruit this dude is bearing.
He's well respected.
Fine. So what? I mean, I'm looking at your fruit. And so what first of all, let me get to the federal government issue for those who don't understand blacks' view of the government. The federal government as terrible as negative it's been toward us, if it was like the federal government protected blacks during Reconstruction in the South. And then when the federal government moved out of the South, that's when Jim Crow
got destroyed.
Yep. Okay. That's why blacks
were
more reliable on the government.
Right.
The federal government is who desegregated the schools in the South. Okay. Right. When blacks were throwing bricks and yelling the N-word and spitting on and doing all types of stuff to the children in Little Rock that wanted to go to Central High School, it was the government that sent in troops to protect them. Okay, it was the government that started affirmative action. Okay, so the government has given more to blacks than some of these individual whites have. And that is why there's a relationship there. Now, among whites, they haven't had a problem when the government gave them affirmative action. They didn't have a problem when the government gave them 270 million acres of land from the west of the Mississippi River to California in the 1800s. Right. They didn't have a problem with the GI Bill or the FDA loan, Federal Housing Administration loans, FHA, that created the white suburbs and strengthened and enhanced the white middle class. They didn't have a problem with the government doing that, but you got a problem with the government in these other ways when they want to do something for black people. So let's not be hypocritical about it, and let's really, look at it truthfully. Now, let me say this, because this guy was talking about slavery, and, we all know that during slavery, whites taught the slave master, slaves be obedient to your master. Mm-hmm. That was all they taught them, right? Let's look at the New Testament definition of slavery. Because when you really look at it, it is more like an employer-employee relationship than anything resembling the chattel slavery that we went through. Ephesians 6:5, it actually says to masters, give just as you, it says, Ephesians 6:9. It says, masters, treat your slaves in the same way I've told the slaves to look at the masters. It says, do not threaten them. Do not threaten them.
Right.
So if you can't threaten me, you certainly can't castrate me. You certainly can't whip me. Right. You certainly can't rape my wife. You certainly can't send my children away. All right? This
man stealing.
The Colossians 4:1 says, masters, give your servants what is just and fair. Just and fair. Wouldn't that be pay for your work?
Yep.
Sure.
And not to mention, as I said earlier, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Would you want that, the way you're treating this person, would you want somebody to treat you that way? Would you want somebody to enslave you? No. So you don't have to be a biblical scholar to understand that chattel slavery as in America was not even close to what the Bible talks about.
Right. And I want to get back to
that would actually be more under man stealing. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go back to what Cliff said too, because with this individual, apparently he is well renowned, in reform circles particularly, and I think that if you have somebody who is clearly a theological white supremacist, I would put it that bluntly, then I think to me that's an indictment against the circles that he rose in. Like obviously black people are not hyping him up for that. So who are these white evangelicals who are propping him up and allowing him to have this much sway in these reform circles? I think it's an indictment against them. How callous is your heart, toward the gospel and the heart of God? And, if you think that, I'm gonna be real with you. I don't know about, I'm gonna throw this at y'all. Like if I had a guy who was in my circle and all day, every day, he's expressing things that militate against the Imago Dei in white people, I'm not gonna let it ride. I would have to confront the brother. I can't
it's
let
the
it
same.
Slide.
There's two things. One, he says that slavery was wrong, so that gets him a pass from a lot of people who want to give him a pass. He condemned slavery, says it was wrong, but the federal government having too much power was a greater evil. That summarizes kind of how he approaches it. And then, second of all, there's a lot of people in the quote unquote evangelical church. There's enough people that rock with that. Just like you have enough people that that are Christians who support the present person in office that propped him up. There's enough people, where you can establish yourself as a credible voice. And unfortunately, because of the economic sway that these groups have, a lot of pastors who are white are afraid to speak up against these guys because a lot of their constituents and their congregants will leave their church.
I don't mean to cut you off, Cliff. I'm sorry, man, but I just want to come. You made an interesting point. I think what's interesting is you have a guy who's saying that that the federal government overreached in terms of their power over the South, and he's defending a system that overreached in terms of its power over the African. You see what I'm saying?
Right. That's the crazy paradox.
So how in the world can you justify?
But he would say the government didn't do. He would argue it wasn't the government that overreached in its power. It was individuals that overreached in their power.
Well, it was individuals that overreached their power over Africans. When you sell somebody down the river,
look,
so that's fascinating.
But look, here's something. This dude is a Christian, supposed to be a Bible believing Christian. Okay,
right,
and yet the Bible clearly speaks against the form of slavery that black people were undergoing.
Right.
Clearly.
Right.
That's a
calls it
biblical
man
issue.
stealing, actually. Yeah.
That's a biblical
and condemns
issue.
it. Yeah.
The notion that the idea of the federal government overstepping its bounds has nothing to do with the Bible. That's a purely subjective, decision. I mean, the Bible doesn't speak on that.
That's a model of government. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And so you are choosing a man-made form of government over a Bible, a commandment in the Bible.
Right.
To do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. To love your neighbor as yourself. So, again, I don't care who gives this guy's accolades.
Right.
I'm not going to view him as, anything special in Christ when he's clearly not bearing the fruit of Christ. I mean, would I sit here and defend if a biblical scholar who's well regarded was a serial cheater on his wife? Would I sit here and defend whether or not he's really a Christian or how's he? No. So I'm not going to sit here and, I don't care what kind of letters this dude has. Jesus himself said, you know them by their fruit.
Right.
This is your fruit.
Right.
Yeah, if you're putting governmental, putting theories of government over God's clear moral law,
over the dignity of people, but it goes back to that unity between American identity and Christianity. There's an unholy alliance there, and that's where the fight is being fought right now. People have an unholy alliance with the national anthem and patriotism, and those things clash. And this man, he doesn't see it. But he has that his identity is too tied to America. Absolutely. And so he'll put that over the dignity. It's a form of idolatry. And he'll place that above the dignity of a whole people group, because those things are married in his mind. Being American and the importance of upholding what America is in his mind is a priority.
Yeah, man. I'll take personhood over patriotism any day.
Ooh,
any day
all right.
So
you wanted to end it off like that, huh?
Yeah, right.
You wanted to just end it off with a bar.
Bam. We should put an explosion sound in the back. But yeah, fellas, man. Definitely been a great convo, man. Always enjoy it. And so I think we're gonna go ahead and close out here. Do y'all want to get any closing thoughts out there before we end out? Y'all good?
Man, I think we've shared everything, man.
Man, we said everything. I'm gonna go back and watch A Different World now. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go back in the archives and break that out.
Right. We're going to end up right there. Just want to say to all the King Talk family out there, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe to the King Talk podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud as well. Make sure you leave a comment, man, and be sure to give us 5 stars and definitely spread the word about what we got going on here. Also, if you want to learn more about the King Movement, be sure to visit us at kingmovement.com. While you're there, man, you can join our online King community at no cost and no commitment from you. So until next time, strong in the Lord.
King, you can hear it when I rhyme. I'm a king, renewed in my mind. I'm a king, I got a different bloodline. I'm a king, jump, I am a king. I'm a king.